A massive fraud scheme uncovered in Minnesota found money intended for social services has been allegedly siphoned indirectly into the pockets of the Somali terrorist group Al-Shabaab.
Before sunrise, federal tactical teams swept across 3 American states and pulled 87 Somali suspects out of apartments, garages, and offices that had looked ordinary the night before. ICE, the FBI, HSI, and armed federal units seized fentanyl powder, fake pills, heroin, multiple firearms, and more than $600,000 in cash in a single coordinated operation that stunned investigators. This was not a random arrest or a routine drug bust, but a direct strike against a hidden criminal system that had survived for years inside quiet U.S. neighborhoods. What follows tracks the investigation step by step, revealing how the network moved drugs, weapons, and money while staying invisible, and why prosecutors now describe this case as one of the largest state-level criminal files in recent memory. Subscribe to Military Power to understand the real threat behind these numbers, because this story is only beginning to surface. At 4:12 in the morning, when most streets were still empty and the lights inside apartment buildings remained off, federal agents began moving simultaneously. The hour mattered because it reduced risk, limited the number of witnesses, and caught targets at their most vulnerable state. ICE, FBI, HSI, and federal tactical teams did not rush or shout. They moved with quiet discipline, spreading through parking lots, stairwells, and side streets that had looked harmless only minutes earlier. What appeared calm on the surface concealed years of planning that were finally reaching their breaking point. This operation did not begin that morning. It was the final step of a 7-year investigation that had grown slowly and carefully. Early clues looked small and almost forgettable. Investigators noticed cash deposits that did not match the reported income, warehouses listed on paper that were empty, and phone traffic that only became active after midnight. None of these signs alone suggested a significant threat, but together they formed a pattern that persisted over time. Over time, those fragments connected into a map of a network that was learning how to survive by staying invisible. Federal analysts soon realized they were not chasing a street gang that relied on noise and fear. This was a structured criminal system built on patience and control. Messages were sent through encrypted platforms, often in short bursts and at irregular hours, making them difficult to trace. Money flowed through shell businesses that blended seamlessly into daily life, frequently operating from small offices and service fronts that raised no suspicion. Every layer was designed to appear ordinary, which allowed the network to operate quietly and avoid attention for years. By the time agents were prepared to move, the plan had been rehearsed repeatedly. Teams knew which doors to enter, which vehicles to block, and which rooms were likely to hold digital evidence. There was no room for improvisation. The goal was speed and precision, not spectacle. At the exact moment the signal was given, the doors were breached almost immediately, and agents flowed inside with controlled force. The absence of chaos was deliberate, because confusion was the enemy of evidence. Inside the first locations, the contrast between appearance and reality became clear. Bedrooms looked ordinary, kitchens showed signs of recent use, and nothing suggested danger at first glance. Yet within minutes, agents uncovered hidden phones, encrypted laptops, and storage spaces that did not belong in typical homes. Suspects were detained quickly, and many were still confused by the sudden shift from sleep to custody. No shots were fired, and no warnings were needed because the operation relied on surprise rather than intimidation. What made this raid different from many others was the level of coordination. Each unit knew its role and followed a strict timeline. Radios remained quiet, except for essential signals, and movements were carefully measured to avoid alerting nearby targets. This discipline reflected the understanding that they were dealing with an organized network, not a group that would panic or scatter at the first sign of trouble. Any delay could allow data to be erased or messages to be sent, and the planners were determined to prevent that. As the first arrests were secured, attention turned immediately to preserving evidence. Agents moved with gloves and evidence bags, treating each device and document as a possible key to the larger picture. Digital material was isolated before remote wipes could occur, and physical records were photographed and logged on site. Every second counted because the network had survived for years by staying one step ahead of its competitors. This morning was about closing that gap. The choice of timing also reflected a deeper understanding of the environment. Early morning raids reduced the chance of bystanders entering the scene and limited the risk of confrontations. The children were asleep, the neighbors were indoors, and traffic was minimal. This approach reduced danger for everyone involved and underscored that the target was a criminal structure, not the surrounding community. The operation aimed to remove a threat without creating a new one. Investigators later explained that the network had been careful not to appear violent. It avoided street fights, loud disputes, and visible signs of power. That restraint was intentional. By staying quiet, it avoided the attention that often destroys criminal groups. This made the eventual raid more complex, because there was no single dramatic moment that had triggered action. Instead, years of quiet monitoring led to one carefully chosen morning. As agents cleared location after location, a consistent picture began to emerge. This was not a loose collection of individuals acting on impulse. It was a well-coordinated system with established rules, clear roles, and a disciplined communication approach. Each arrest removed one piece, but the structure remained the focus. The objective was not just to detain suspects, but to expose how the entire operation functioned beneath the surface of everyday life. This moment invites a question for anyone watching these events unfold. How many similar networks could still be operating quietly, hidden behind everyday routines and familiar buildings without drawing attention? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this case raises concerns that reach far beyond a single city. With the initial wave of arrests complete, the operation moved into its next and most critical phase, as federal teams expanded the raid beyond one location and struck multiple states at the same time to prevent the network from warning itself. The network survived for years because it did not look like a gang at all. There were no colors, no loud meetings, and no visible show of power on the streets. Instead, its strength came from silence and routine. Members communicated through encrypted messages that appeared and vanished quickly, often sent late at night when digital traffic was low. These messages were brief and discreet, avoiding names and details, and were designed to facilitate orders without leaving a clear trail. This system enabled the group to coordinate across cities without requiring them to gather in one place. Money and goods moved through businesses that looked ordinary to anyone passing by. Some locations were listed as logistics services, others as small retail shops, and a few even appeared as community charities. These fronts did not attract attention because they did not need customers to function. They existed to facilitate the movement of money, receive packages, and create paperwork that made criminal activity appear legitimate. In many cases, the storefronts were quiet, with little foot traffic, which helped them blend into neighborhoods where people were used to seeing empty shops come and go. Identity fraud played a central role in sustaining the system. The network collected personal information and documents, then used them to open bank accounts, sign leases, and register vehicles. Each false identity reduced the risk for the real operators because arrests or investigations would reveal names that did not exist. This tactic made it difficult for authorities to follow money or connect activity across state lines. It also allowed the group to replace members quickly without disrupting operations. The structure of the network was built to avoid collapse. Nothing was stored in a single location, and no one person controlled every part of the operation. Drugs, money, weapons, and records were separated and moved along different paths. Couriers were aware only of their immediate tasks, and communication flowed through narrow channels. If one link failed, the rest of the system could continue to function. This design reflected a modern criminal mindset that values resilience over speed. What made the network especially dangerous was that it did not rely on open violence. There were no street wars or public threats that might draw attention to the area. By avoiding conflict, the group managed to evade police pressure and public scrutiny. Its presence became part of the background of daily life, unnoticed and unchallenged. This approach enabled it to operate longer than traditional gangs, which often collapse under the weight of their own aggression. When federal agents finally moved in, the hidden nature of the operation became clear through what they found. Fentanyl powder was recovered in quantities large enough to supply entire distribution chains. Fake pills designed to look like legitimate medication were discovered alongside heroin packaged for transport. These drugs were not stored in obvious stash houses, but hidden inside normal living spaces where no one would expect them. Weapons were also uncovered, further revealing the potential for sudden violence. Firearms were found tucked behind walls, inside closets, and in sealed containers. They were not displayed or used openly, but kept ready as tools of protection and control. The presence of these weapons showed that while the network avoided public conflict, it was prepared to defend itself if threatened. Cash was scattered across multiple locations in small and large amounts. More than $600,000 was documented during the operation, much of it hidden in backpacks, storage boxes, and household containers. This method reduced risk by preventing the loss of all funds in a single seizure. It also made it harder to track profits, as money was constantly moving and rarely stayed in one place for an extended period. The danger of fentanyl cannot be overstated. Even small amounts can cause fatal overdoses, and the spread of fake pills increases the risk to people who believe they are taking safe medication. Each package seized represented lives that might have been lost. Investigators viewed this aspect of the case as one of the most serious threats uncovered during the raid. The discovery of weapons added another layer of concern. Firearms in the hands of organized groups increase the risk of escalation, especially if the network feels cornered. While this group avoided open battles, the tools for violence were clearly present. Without intervention, future conflict could have escalated rapidly from a hidden crime to a public danger. This operation exposed a form of crime that is harder to see and harder to stop. It does not announce itself through chaos, but grows quietly inside ordinary environments. Traditional gang markers are absent, replaced by planning, paperwork, and patience. That is why networks like this challenge modern law enforcement more than older models of organized crime. As investigators continue to analyze the seized drugs, weapons, and money, they are also turning their attention to the financial records and documents that may reveal how this system expanded and who else was involved, leading directly into the next stage of the investigation. When agents finished the first wave of arrests and secured the locations, attention shifted to what mattered most. The records, boxes of documents, notebooks, and digital files were carried out carefully, because these items held the truth about how the network really worked. The drugs and weapons showed danger, but the ledgers explained control. Page by page, investigators saw that this was not a loose, criminal effort. It was a system designed to function quietly and efficiently for years. The accounting books were detailed and disciplined. Each entry listed amounts, dates, and short-coded notes that pointed to specific actions. Some pages tracked incoming money, while others recorded outgoing payments to drivers, storage holders, and coordinators. There were weekly summaries that showed steady income, not sudden spikes. This consistency led investigators to conclude that the operation had reached a stable rhythm long before the raid. It was not surviving week to week, but operating with confidence. Different handwriting styles appeared across the ledgers, revealing a clear division of labor. One person recorded transport costs, another tracked cash movement, a third focused on supply quantities. No single hand controlled everything. This separation reduced risk and limited knowledge at each level. If one person was caught, the rest of the system could continue. That design explained how the network survived for so long without collapsing under pressure. Maps found alongside the ledgers added another layer of clarity. These were not casual drawings. They showed routes, time windows, and transfer points across multiple states. Lines connected cities in Minnesota with locations in Ohio and Virginia. Specific stops were designated as temporary holding points, where goods would stay briefly before being moved again. The constant movement reduced the chance of significant seizures and kept attention low. The maps also revealed planning that adjusted to risk. Routes avoided busy highways during peak hours and favored less traveled corridors. Transfers were timed to early mornings or late nights, when traffic and surveillance were lighter. This level of detail showed experience and learning over time. The network was studying the environment and adapting its behavior like a professional operation. Together, the ledgers and maps described a structured smuggling and laundering system that covered multiple states. Drugs followed one path, money followed another, and communication stayed separate. No location held everything. Apartments, garages, and offices each played limited roles. This separation created confusion for outsiders, but provided stability for those within the system. Investigators compared the structure to a business model. Roles were defined. Tasks were assigned. Schedules were followed. Couriers moved goods according to instructions. Financial handlers converted profits into clean funds. Coordinators ensured timing stayed precise. The operation did not rely solely on trust, but on established procedure. That approach allowed it to grow without drawing attention. The presence of clear schedules confirmed that this was not a random crime. Movements happened in predictable cycles. Payments were planned to avoid notice. Supplies arrived and left without delay. This discipline explained how the network avoided the chaos that destroys many criminal groups. It also explained why traditional warning signs were absent. As evidence teams cataloged the materials, the scope of the case expanded. Each page pointed to new names, new addresses, and new links. Investigators began connecting apartments to warehouses and vehicles to businesses. The volume of information grew quickly. Thousands of documents and files required careful review. What started as a single operation has now reached across jurisdictions. News of the findings spread through the surrounding communities. Residents who had seen police vehicles and blocked streets began to understand the scale of what had been hidden nearby. Many were stunned. These were familiar buildings in ordinary spaces. The idea that an extensive criminal system had operated there quietly was challenging to accept. Shock soon turned into worry. People questioned what they had missed. Some remembered strange patterns or quiet businesses, but had never imagined something this large. Daily routines felt different. Conversations slowed. The silence was filled with uncertainty rather than peace. Community leaders spoke publicly to calm fears. They emphasized that the investigation focused on specific individuals rather than entire neighborhoods. They encouraged cooperation and patience. Still, the emotional impact remained. Trust had been damaged, and rebuilding it would take time. From a legal perspective, the case quickly became one of the largest the state had seen in years. Prosecutors faced a mountain of evidence. Thousands of pages of records, digital data, and physical items needed to be organized and verified. Charges reflected the size of the operation, including trafficking, fraud, weapons violations, and participation in an organized criminal enterprise. Court systems felt immediate pressure. Multiple defendants required coordination. Hearings had to be scheduled carefully. Legal teams are prepared for lengthy proceedings. The complexity tested resources and highlighted the challenge of handling modern organized crime cases. Beyond the courtroom, the case raised broader concerns. If this network had operated quietly for years, others might still exist. Law enforcement agencies began reviewing patterns and methods exposed by the case. The investigation became a reference point for detecting similar systems elsewhere. The exposure of this operation delivered a clear warning. Organized crime no longer needs visible power or open violence to succeed. It can hide behind routine and paperwork, blending into everyday life. This reality forces a shift in how threats are identified and addressed. As communities adjusted and legal work advanced, investigators prepared for the next phase. Attention began turning toward deeper financial trails and additional connections that had not yet surfaced, leading directly into the final stage of this investigation. Investigators also began reviewing communication logs that had not been fully decrypted during the initial operation. These records hinted at further coordination beyond the known locations, suggesting that some participants may have operated with even tighter secrecy. Analysts spent long hours comparing timestamps and message patterns to understand how instructions moved through the system without creating obvious signals. Financial specialists were brought in to reconstruct the flow of money in greater detail. Bank records, transaction histories, and business filings were examined in detail. This process aimed to identify how illegal profits entered the legitimate economy and where they ultimately ended up. Each discovery added weight to the case and expanded the list of potential charges. For many residents, the slow release of new information extended the sense of unease. Every update reminded them that the investigation was far from over. The idea that more names and locations could surface kept attention focused on the ongoing process rather than the arrests alone. At the same time, officials emphasized that careful work was necessary to avoid mistakes. Rushing could weaken cases or allow key figures to escape accountability. The pace of the investigation reflected a balance between urgency and precision. This stage of the operation marked a turning point. What began as a coordinated raid had evolved into a long and complex effort to dismantle an entire system. Each document reviewed and each account traced brought investigators closer to understanding the full extent of the network. The story does not end with what was found during the raid. It continues through the slow process of analysis and accountability, where facts replace secrecy and structure replaces speculation. This unfolding phase prepares the ground for the final examination of consequences and outcomes that will follow. The operation described in this case stands as one of the clearest examples of how modern criminal networks operate within the United States. Federal agencies did not face a single location or a small group acting on impulse. They confronted a coordinated system that stretched across multiple states, involved dozens of locations, and required years of investigation to expose. The arrests, seizures, and volume of evidence indicate that this was not an isolated incident, but a large-scale operation designed to survive and grow over time. The scale of the operation alone demands attention. Nearly 90 suspects were taken into custody across Minnesota, Ohio, and Virginia in a single, coordinated effort. Multiple federal agencies collaborated, sharing intelligence and coordinating their actions to prevent the escape or destruction of evidence. This level of coordination is not deployed for minor cases. It reflects the seriousness of the threat and the belief that allowing the network to continue would have carried significant consequences. What makes this case even more troubling is the sophistication of the network itself. It did not rely on visible violence or public intimidation. Instead, it used structure, planning, and concealment to operate quietly. Encrypted communication has limited exposure. Fake businesses provided cover. Identity fraud created distance between crimes and those responsible. Every decision was designed to reduce risk and delay detection. This approach represents a shift away from traditional gang behavior toward a more disciplined, corporate style of crime. The threat posed by such networks goes beyond drugs and weapons. When criminal systems can operate undetected within ordinary neighborhoods, they undermine trust and stability. Residents may live next to operations they cannot see or understand, while illegal profits flow through the same economic channels as legitimate businesses. This creates long-term damage that is harder to measure than street-level violence, but just as dangerous to public safety. This case also raises an uncomfortable possibility. The network that was dismantled may not have been unique. Its success suggests that similar systems could exist elsewhere, using the same methods and exploiting the same gaps. Investigators have already begun reviewing other regions for comparable patterns. The arrests marked a significant victory, but they may also reveal the extent of work that remains to be done. The broader lesson from this operation is clear. Crime today does not always announce itself with chaos or fear. It can grow silently, protected by routine and paperwork, until it reaches a scale that threatens entire communities. Detecting and dismantling such systems requires patience, coordination, and the willingness to look beyond traditional warning signs. This case shows what is possible when agencies commit to that approach. As the legal process continues, the focus will shift from investigation to accountability. Courts will examine the evidence, determine responsibility, and decide consequences. For the public, the outcome will help define how serious the system is about confronting hidden criminal threats. Each conviction or sentence will send a message about the cost of operating in the shadows. For viewers and readers following this story, the question is no longer whether this network was dangerous, but what it represents. Was it an exception or part of a larger pattern? The answer to that question will shape future enforcement strategies and public awareness. If you want to stay informed about cases like this and understand how they affect national security and community safety, subscribe to Military Power. Please share your thoughts in the comments and let us know how you view this operation, as well as whether you believe similar networks are still active elsewhere in the country.